And as someone who had grown up in the scene, like watching Hooney all his life, I was just like, holy cow. I was like, I just took this class because I was excited, and all of a sudden now I'm meeting like a literal world champion and someone who's like been one of my favorite players of all time. And at that point I was just like, wow, like if I'm able to meet like a pro LoL player at this point, and I haven't even like really begun my journey on esports, then like where can I really be if I pursue this?
That's community manager and podcast host Jesse Roberts, talking about his mind-boggling introduction to esports. As a community manager for Esports One, Jesse focuses on building a fun and engaging community. Jesse is also the creator and host of the E1 fantasy podcast, The Lock-In, the #1 League of Legends esports fantasy talk show. I'm your host, Drew Proctor, and on today's episode of the Esports Careers Podcast, I talked to Jesse to learn just what it is he does as a community manager, why community management might not be for everyone, and if our sport management degrees help us in esports. So let's hop into today's episode. Welcome back to the Esports Careers Podcast. I'm your host, Drew Proctor, and today I've got on Jesse Roberts. Jesse is the community manager for an esports fantasy company.
Yeah, so Esports One fantasy competition is kind of just like one of the products as of right now, but overall it's a data and analytics esports company.
I guess could you kind of tell me a little bit more about Esports One, kind of like what you guys do at Esports One, what you guys are about?
Yeah, so I actually started off as a user for Esports One. So they released their fantasy platform. For those who don't know, it's for LCS and LEC regions. And I just kind of saw an ad for them on Instagram last year. And then I ended up joining their Discord server, starting to talk with all the different employees, participated in the spring split of the fantasy competition. And basically, the way it works is you draft your 5 different positions: top, jungle, mid, bot, support, and then a team. And I was really interested in fantasy LCS when that was a part of Riot Games several years ago, and was super sad to see it leave. So seeing a platform like this come into the industry, I was super excited. And because like the ones that I've seen for like DraftKings and things like that, I was not interested in. It just felt very kind of like fake to me. Kind of just felt like they were just wanting to get their name out there in the esports world, but didn't put in a nice spin on it or like put any effort into it. And so when I saw Esports One on Instagram and started connecting with all these people in their Discord, I was just like, wow, like these guys are super awesome. And it was a small startup. And so I was just like, man, like this is something that's really cool. Like I've always been someone who's really enjoyed fantasy football and fantasy basketball. And so again, being able to go back into like esports fantasy, I was super excited. And just the fact that they were so open and willing to talk with everyone in the community. I mean, like for anyone who's ever worked in startups, you know that you were busy all of the time. And the fact that they made so much of an effort to actually just communicate to their users as much as possible in their Discord, I was like, wow, like this is something I want to be a part of. And I kind of just went through the spring split, just being a user and trying to stick around pretty often. And then they started doing some community events during the off season with COVID happening and no international competitions. And then right before the summer split started, I was just like, you know, probably I've been sitting at home now for the last like 4 months. I've graduated like a month before and I haven't done anything with my life. I should probably start looking for a job. And just kind of like on a whim, I searched their website and I found a contact. It wasn't even for like opportunities or anything. I think it was just their support contact. And I was just like, hey, I'm really interested in talking with you guys about like maybe working for you. Like, is that a possibility? Like, how do I get involved? What can I do? Like, do I need to send you a resume and things? And they messaged back and they were just kind of surprised, I guess, because of how like blunt I was about it. And then they're like, no, yeah, we could definitely set something up. Let's have a discussion first to see what you'd be interested in, and then we can kind of go from there.
So what did it kind of look like moving forward from that initial contact?
From the person that I was talking with, like the team at Esports One was just very open to it. Because I mean, like most startups in general are very open to people working for them, especially if you're like either willing to volunteer or just want to be a part of it. And so I kind of went in with like nothing in mind. Like I didn't even like I was just looking for something to do. I was looking for a way to be a part of the industry, especially with the summer split about to start. And so I was just like, honestly, like I'm kind of fine with anything that you might have, but I am like trying to build my expertise around Discord and community building. And so I'd be interested in doing some sort of community management role for you guys. Cause at the time, the person that was, it was like kind of a 2-person task managing their Discord. It was one of their devs who had created the Discord bot, and then it was one of the content creators. And so they were just like kind of having to tackle it on the side as they're also trying to do all this other stuff. And so it was like definitely a role that needed to be filled. And like in the interview, like after I'd sent the initial question looking for something, and after we had the initial discussion, they were just like, okay, it sounds great. We really want to be able to see like what you can bring to the table though. Like we don't know who you are. We have to like see that you actually have something to your name and can do something for us. And so they kind of just like gave me the task of like get them some really good ideas written down and show them what I was made of. And I don't know if like I kind of like almost overdid it, because initially like they were just like, yeah, like this shouldn't be something that takes like a whole week or like even like several days. Like just get your thoughts on paper and show us what you're made of. And I ended up typing like an 8-page proposal. So I just like I had like 2 pages of like these are tons of the ideas that I think we could pursue at some point. Like, and I kind of like ranked them. I kind of put like just short bullet points on each one of them, like, oh, this is what this would look like, this is what like the sponsorship value that we could get out of, like all these different like steps like that really need to be looked at. So I was looking at it from like all angles, like not only like feasibility as far as like is it something low effort that the team can do, or is it going to be like super resource intensive, is it something that in the future can be monetized, is it something that we're doing purely just to make the users happy, like what does it look like? And so I really tried looking at all my different ideas from that angle. And then they wanted one idea that was fleshed out, and they were kind of vague on that, so I didn't know like how fleshed out they wanted. And so that's what like 5 pages of the proposal was, and that was currently what you see as the E1 Fantasy podcast, the lock-in. And so I wanted to really try and write out as much of it as I could from that perspective and make it really easy for somebody who doesn't have any fantasy sports or esports history, and make it super understandable for them. And I'd like to think that we've done a good job on that so far. We're still working on it, but like I said, just really fleshed out that idea and presented several names to them, and then sent them the document. They read over it, kind of talked about it as a team, talked about whether they really did need me for community management. And then they were like, like you really gave us a lot more than we were expecting in a way. And because I think at the point they were kind of just like seeing me as like, oh, this is just like another like recent grad or just like college kid that's just trying to, oh, I want to work in esports, and not really thinking about it and like what it takes to work in esports. Because I mean, like if we had startups that just took everyone that came to them, obviously the startups would never make it past funding. And so like I completely understood where they were coming from. And at first, like to be honest, I was kind of scared. I was just like, like I don't really have that much experience in esports, and they kind of recognize like some of my weaknesses and that I was kind of lacking in the community building aspect, but I really wanted to work on it and turn that into a strength. And then they called me and they were just like, let's do it. Like, you're in, show us what you can do, and we'll just kind of go from there. And like with it being a startup, immediately like community management wasn't my only role. Like I was able to be a part of any conversation that I wanted to, whether it was just helping engineers brainstorm features that we could look at, or it was helping marketing figure out different ways with social media or surveys that we're trying to do. So it's really nice just to be able to see like how fast they were just letting me, like they pulled the curtains back and let me kind of see just everything with the company and say like, okay, this, because I think like as a community manager, that's something really important, is in a way the community manager almost becomes one of the faces of your company, especially if you're not a company that's like super driven by content creation or anything like that. Like your community manager is the person that's constantly interacting with your user base. And so it's really important as someone who's getting asked 100 questions in Discord every day, or getting DM'd, or getting asked questions on Twitter, that you know what's going on, whether it's engineering telling me like, oh, like these are current bugs we're having, or just like they gave me a lot of channels and accessibility to all the different departments, which made my initial onboarding so much easier.
That's kind of like one of the beauties of startups, like you said, is that even though you're in community management, or you're working with like a pretty small team, so getting insight from everybody on the team, no matter what kind of position they hold, it's going to be insightful, right? And it feels good, I'm sure, to be able to have a part in engineering, or like a part in like UX, it's just what, like all these other different aspects you get to tap into a little bit. So you've been the community manager for Esports One for 3 months?
2 months and 2 days. So since June 22nd.
So you're really fresh into esports.
Very much so. So I had a previous experience that lasted for several months as an internship my junior year at university, but it was like more just purely on the production side, and so I didn't really get a good glimpse as to what at least like the League of Legends industry looks like. And so this has been really eye-opening, and I've consumed more just every single aspect within the industry. I'm on Twitter 24/7 looking and trying to connect with people all the time and like figure out as much as possible. I'm watching every single interview of like Travis Gafford that I can, like all these different content creators and streamers. I'm just trying to absorb as much content and get as much of a foundation of knowledge as I can right now. And I would definitely say that like from where I was at 2 months ago to now, I am a completely different person in terms of my capabilities, to be honest.
So it's pretty much just been full throttle since you've started, right?
Yeah, it really has. So, and that was something that the team also had to like kind of like push back on, because one of my coworkers, Johnny, who's VP of content at E1, and so obviously I kind of go to him with all my things for my podcast. He was just like, "Man, I don't know like what your exact hours are, but I see you online way too much. And like I know that we've kind of been like throwing like just small things on your plate here and there, but I'm sure also all of that's been adding up. You should really realize that you are like your primary role as a community manager, and you should not be getting burnt out on like all this other stuff. Like, yeah, it's awesome that you're helping the team, but please take time for yourself." And like in the first like week, I probably did like a 70-hour week. And then also on, because at that point I was like also trying to figure out everything on the podcast and be like, okay, I got handed this. Now I need to like really like figure it all out. And I'm still working a part-time job on the side on top of that 70 hours. So I was just like, you might be onto something. I should probably take like a small step back and kind of regroup. So things have like kind of like settled a little bit, even though now we're really getting into like a big stride with it being fantasy playoffs and then also looking towards worlds. But things have been really good. The last like few weeks I've really like started to settle in to my role.
I've heard a lot of insight, and I guess somewhat of horror stories of like community managers and social media managers. Essentially, it's like a 24/7 job. Like it's all like you don't take weekends off. It's all the time, every single day. Is that kind of accurate?
Yeah. So my first 2 weeks, because like I said, I came in with tons of ideas, and like some of those were community game nights, and then also I was like doing the podcast on the side, and then I also started doing viewing parties for as many of the games as I could initially. And so it was just like, okay, on Friday, since that's still part of the work week, I'll only do like a couple of games and then kind of like work where I can on those days. And then I was like, okay, like I can do Saturdays too and like watch games with the community all day. Oh, I can do Sundays probably too. And after like the first 2 weeks of doing that, I was like, oh man, I was like, it is hard to be like, obviously it's not face to face, but it is hard to be on call essentially 24/7. And I think like me taking a step back and only doing uh one game on Friday and then like one game on Sunday really helped because I also realized that I started picking like the game of the weeks essentially because I realized that's when more people were interested. Like nobody wanted to go out and watch like Dignitas versus Immortals. So it's like, okay, I'm probably not gonna watch that game. And like starting to like pick things like that and then just on weekends kind of realizing, okay, like I won't check Discord for like 2 hours and then I'll come back, answer a bunch of questions. Because I really did have a like hard time as far as like I was thinking, okay, I have to be on here like all the time. Like this is my job. And I think Johnny has done an awesome job with kind of like mentoring me in a way as far as like, hey, take a step back. It's not the end of the world if you're not able to respond to someone on a weekend. Like, yeah, be around if possible. Like if you're sitting at your computer and you're just playing League, like maybe check it here and there. But don't feel like you need to be on it all day on the weekends and things like that. And so that's kind of the approach I've taken to now. And I will say that it does help that I really, really love League of Legends and I love talking about League of Legends. And so being in a community and I love fantasy sports. So being in a community where that's all that I'm talking about, like it doesn't feel like work to me when at 11 o'clock at night when I'm playing League of Legends with my friends, I get a ping in Discord and it's someone asking me a question. Like I'm more than happy to go and answer that. I'm more than happy to just kind of like, if I'm scrolling through Twitter on a Saturday and I see several posts by either analysts within the scene or posts by teams talking about players that might be subbed out, like you better believe that I'm going to like copy that, send that to my community, like start discussion about it. And or even if it's just like memes, like I try to like do stuff like that too. And so it's honestly gotten to the point where I really don't see it as work. And there's definitely like a few community members that really they make your life, and I'm sure like any community manager or social media manager can attest to this, like whether you're in social media and you realize you have that person that always replies to every single one of your tweets, even if it's from like your team or company account, you recognize that they're always one of the first people to reply. Well, then community management, like on Discord, there's several users that I know if I either like ask a question to the community, like looking for suggestions on something, like if we're trying to get feedback on a new feature, or if I'm running an event, there's like 2 or 3 people that I know immediately are going to be like, I'll be there, or hey, like these are my thoughts on it. And so those people are like the unsung heroes, to be honest. So like I've definitely like tried to make a concerted effort to like recognize them for what they do. And I think that's something that a lot like I've started getting to the point, especially now, like as I'm trying to figure out like what small things within our server and community we can fix. I'm in most of the LCS team discords. I'm in like just random company discords that are within the industry and like seeing what they do well and what they do bad. And it kind of surprises me that there's so many companies that don't really recognize those people, whether it's like as simple as literally just giving them like some sort of role of recognition within the Discord or just like something like that. Because those super active users that are really committed just because they enjoy your community, that like obviously like a lot of my community was built before I even got there, which makes my job easier. But those users are the ones that really make your community. If you can keep those users active and you can keep them engaged and always super welcoming, like there's a lot of times where like I might be busy with something else and we have 20 new users join our Discord. Well, I'm gone for like 2-3 hours and I'm not there to welcome them, which I feel bad about because like as a community manager, like you want to have people welcoming them to keep that retention rate high and like increasing the chances that those people might respond And I'm not sure what exactly the stats are, but if you get people to respond or check out multiple text channels or speak in a voice channel, like on the first day of them joining, their likelihood of returning to your server is super high. And so having those really active users like that is so crucial. Like those guys, there'll be times where I just like turn on Discord in the morning and I'll see like tons of people joined overnight and those VIP users greeting them saying, hey, like if you need anything, let me know, or make sure to message Jesse, like he can answer all your questions. So it's been really nice to be able to have people like that within the community already. And I really hope to grow that base of engaged users.
Yeah, I think you actually just touched on it a bit with that question, but would you mind going into like a few, or I guess kind of elaborating on what your job looks like as a community manager and kind of what I guess what's expected of you? What are your duties as a community manager?
Yeah, so I would say that, and I definitely think that for a community manager at a team, it might look slightly different. Obviously, I'm not sure because this is kind of like my first opportunity within the industry. But at least at Esports One, since I am able to be a part of so many other departments, I'm not able to do as like many community manager specific events or activities that I would like to compared to like someone that might be the community manager at C9 per se. But the way that my week kind of works is like a lot of it's just about engaging your users and like taking care of them, whether it's through different events or activities. And so on Mondays is when our lineups release in the community. And so I'm constantly trying to start discussion like, oh, hey, what do you guys think about this pick this week? Like, what do you think about maybe picking double lift versus picking tactical this week? And just trying to start that conversation, getting people active and doing it across multiple channels because you don't want to just be active in one channel. And then Tuesday, the podcast release, getting people to talk about that. We have other news articles that release, getting people to talk about those. And then, like, one of the main things that I have going on right now is community game nights. And at first, we were doing just like one big one where it was at like 6 p.m. Pacific time. And we noticed we had a lot of people there, but we also noticed that we had a lot of EU users there. And they were just like, man, it's 3 a.m. for me. And immediately I was like, oh man, like I feel so bad for this, but it's like, how can I really cater to them when I don't have, like, I can't be playing League of Legends at like 9 a.m. when I'm supposed to be working or anything like that. And so for a few weeks, like it really took me like trying to figure out like how to find a person within the community that would be willing to run that. And so we ended up getting one of our users who's from London to run our EU community events. And so I'll send him like all the details, like, hey, we're doing EU game night at this time on Wednesdays. Here's some of the ideas I have for it. Here's some codes for some of the like rewards that we might be giving out. And then like I try to be active within the call. And occasionally, like if I have 30 minutes, like I'll hop in, play an ARAM or something like that with them, or play some of the other games that we might have. And then other than that, like I've been able to trust him to kind of take that and run with it. And then at night, I run our NA game nights now. And like other than that, I think especially for what we are, since we are a fantasy esports company, something that people really love is having that like live aspect of seeing their points go up every time a player gets a kill or an assist or a team gets a tower. And so it's really important that you engage users as that's happening. So during games, it's the second, like if I see like PoE today when he got a triple kill, it's like immediately putting that in the chat. Oh wow, whoever has PoE this week and like his and if you picked his champion correctly right now, like, oh man, you were getting huge points. And then that immediately triggers everyone that drafted PoE in the Discord. They're just like dropping. We have a Discord bot that links to your fantasy lineup, and so you're able to just type in a lineup command that'll show the 5 players in the team you picked. And so that's been like our Discord bot, our team that like we can get into that a little bit. Our team that built that makes my job even easier because it's as simple like me starting that discussion, instantly get 5 or 10 people that just dropped their lineup that has Power of Evil in it. And then all of them start talking like, oh, wow, like we're the smartest people in the server, or like, oh man, like I really hope that he keeps on doing this. And so, like I said, that bot has tons of different commands that really make my job easy because we also it also does predictions. And so before a match starts, you can predict a game and you'll have like 7 different prompts, like which team will get first blood, who will win, who will get the most barons, kind of just stuff like that. And even just having that, you'll see people constantly being engaged during the team, like, oh man, FlyQuest didn't get first blood that game. Dang, like there goes one of my predictions. Or like, oh, I called that series perfectly. I predicted it was going to be 3-1 FlyQuest. And then realizing that like you're one of the very few people that predicted that FlyQuest was going to beat C9 today. Like kind of having all of those features from our Discord bot has been super helpful and super important to my job. It makes it even like that much easier because it's as simple sometimes as me just dropping my lineup in, and that gets people talking, and I don't even have to like at that point really facilitate it. People will just be like, oh, like I saw that pick, I was kind of interested in using that player this week, and then it gets like 1 or 2 other people interested, and it just kind of like snowballs. Obviously, like this was a very long way to basically just say I'm just trying to engage the users and find even just the smallest of things possible to engage them. But my role in like during the LCS split is definitely different from what it will look like during the off season, because during the off season we're not going to be having lineups. I'm not going to be able to ask people to drop their lineup during the week. And so we'll be doing a lot more community events, whether it's some of the things we're looking at is like doing trivia, doing ARAM tournaments, doing 1v1 tournaments, trying to like incorporate different games like Among Us or Fall Guys, things like that that people might have in the community. Like that way, like people aren't constantly on League, and maybe like some people might get burnt out. And but a lot of those games are also like super simple, super fun to play, and it's a lot easier instead of having like someone who's diamond playing with someone who's bronze, and it's like, okay, how do I balance these 2 teams in like a game of like friendly matches within the server. I'm really excited to see what the off season looks like and kind of like what I can build it out to be. And I also think that having my podcast lends me to a lot of really unique opportunities as well, being a community manager. So in the future, I definitely have been looking at ways that I can either bring users in, maybe if it's just like for one question, or maybe there's going to be a segment where I'm like maybe interviewing a user, asking them about their experience or like their lineup for the week, things like that. So I have a lot of plans for the off season, and I'm sure some of them will change kind of just depending on what things look like. But simplest way to put it is my job as a community manager is to engage and just be kind of like the face and like the wall that catches the users before anything bad might happen. So I'm also moderating the Discord. I'm also helping report any bugs that our users have to our dev team. So I think that being a community manager, we kind of touched on this earlier, like as far as like my access to all the different channels and departments within the team. As a community manager, you're really going to be involved with that because you just deal with, since you're dealing with users every single day for like every minute of the day, you're going to get all different types of questions and all different types of complaints or suggestions. And so it's really important that you're on top of the ball. And kind of just like last thing to put as far as like community management, I would say that you have to be very organized with a lot of what you're doing, because it looks really bad, and like very also just time oriented, because it looks really bad as far as if like you're scheduling all these events and then you're late to them and you have like 5 people sitting in your Discord or 20 people sitting in your Discord waiting on you to start the event. And then on top of that, just like patience and just overall a really good attitude.
You were speaking on it earlier, but I could just like imagine the amount of, because I know in like regular fantasy, like the trash talk can get pretty bad. And so
Yeah.
I'm just imagining like a bunch of league players just shit talking each other on like
Yep.
lineups that they picked for fantasy. I just imagine it as like 10 times worse than like fantasy football or something, because I know how bad league players can get.
Yeah, the banter within the community, and like we also like help contribute to it some. Like we try to keep it very fun, and so there's also a lot of banter between me and my coworkers. Like one of our coworkers, anytime he has a terrible like fantasy week where he's like one of the like bottom 200 users or something, we flame the hell out of him, and we make sure that everyone in the Discord is flaming him. And so it's become like this kind of just like meme built into our culture now, where it's just like people are constantly reminding him to like set a lineup and constantly like telling him, "Oh, that doesn't look good. Like you should do this." And so like this week he's on vacation. And so something I didn't have this idea. Props to Johnny, our VP of content. He was just like, "Hey, let's build his lineup for him this week." And so he built like he was just like, "Okay, users like submit like the worst lineup possible to me." And so we had like immediately just like 10 people just like, "Oh, pick these 5 players for him. Like let's get him like literally just like 20 points this week." And so like even just like small stuff like that, like troll things like that have been super fun and a really easy way to engage. But back to your point, like, yeah, the banter is definitely something you have to keep an eye on. Like, you have to get a really good idea of like what towing the line is, as far as like who's like you come to realize very fast like what users kind of know where that line is and like to push it and like push it just a little bit more every time. But fortunately, everyone that I've had like that is also very receptive to just like, hey, we are like kind of like PG-13 here. Like, let's be a little bit more friendly with it. So it's been really fun though.
Have you had any like really big issues where like a user was just like way too far and just like wouldn't like back down at all, or has it been pretty tame? Or have you like been able to kind of calm it down if it's gotten too bad?
We had like one issue that kind of got blown out of proportion, but fortunately, like a lot of the team and a lot of the community was very much on the same side. And then at the end, like we talked to the user who was responsible and like kind of got both sides on it, and it ended up working out, and he decided to come back to the community, I believe, afterwards. But I know initially at first he was super pissed off at me because he was like, "Hey, this is your community, like how come they're treating me this way?" I'm like, "Ooh." And it was definitely tough because it was like within my like first, yeah, it was like my first like 2 or 3 weeks of working, and that was one of those moments where it's just like, okay, I need to go to someone above me. And I was like, I messaged my coworker Johnny. I was like, "Hey, can you help me with this?" And that's also like that's another thing kind of that I think is important for community managers to take note of. Like, your job is to build a very fun culture and like get people engaged with the product. And so it can be very hard for you to be someone not someone's friend. Like if you're having to reprimand someone or just like say like, "Hey, if you keep this up, I'm going to have to ban you from the community." And I think there's like a time and a place where it's the community manager to do that. Like if you have someone else within, obviously it's going to be very different at like all different companies. But for me, fortunately, it's a lot of the team is also just like, "Hey, we aren't talking with these people face to face every single day, and we're not having to be their friend like you are." Well, I say having, like I enjoy being their friend, but it can be very hard. Like these users who are very engaged with your platform, and maybe it's just them having a really bad day. Like on cases like that, like, okay, like I understand and like I talk to them, like I DM them, make sure everything's okay, tell them like kind of I'm why I don't feel okay with what they said or what they did. But in other cases, when it's just someone that's completely blowing things out of proportion, causing a scene, that's one of those where like I make a statement and like address it to the community, like, "Hey, like this might have happened," or just like, "Hey, we're trying to make this as friendly as possible, so we are going to warn users about this, this, and this." And then Johnny kind of swooped in and like saves the day, and he's the one that like kind of handled the 2 users that were like causing problems. Like he was the one that talked with them, tried to like tell them what was going on, and kind of had to put his foot down Because I don't know, like I definitely think that there's a case to be made where everything should be on the community manager since it's your community that you're moderating. But at the same time, I do feel like it might not necessarily be a good look to have the person that's trying to be everyone's friend also be the one that reprimands them. So, because like no one wants to hear their friend like come up to them and say like, "Oh man, you really screwed up. Like, you shouldn't be doing this," or "Hey man, like if you do something like that again, I can't be your friend. Like, you have to leave my server." So that's definitely something that I'm sure I like. Who knows? I might have a completely different view on this as I get more accustomed to the role. But as of right now, it's something that I've been considering a lot and trying to figure out where I stand on it.
Yeah, that sounds like a kind of pretty difficult. It's like an ultimatum, all right? It's
Yeah.
like you don't. I feel like it's the situation where like a parent is like their child's friend as well,
Yep.
and like
I
they
think
they don't
that's
want to have to discipline them, but
yeah, that's a perfect analogy, honestly. So like I'm trying to be like that cool dad and like friends with everybody and like making sure all of us are just having a great time. And then you just have like that rotten teenager who comes in and you're just like, "Oh man, I want to be your friend, but you make this really hard."
I actually think it's pretty interesting that so you were a sport management major at Rice
Yes.
University, right? And I think that's so we were both sport management majors, and I think that's kind of something that I'd like to touch on. So I actually went to a junior college first, and then I transferred in and I chose sport management. And the reason I chose sport management was because that is the degree that I thought had the most correlation to esports because kind
Mhm.
of my processes or like my idea has always been pursuing a career in esports, right?
Okay.
Um, what was that? Did you choose sport management for a similar reason, or did you choose sport management because you like regular sports? Kind of what was that? What was that process in choosing sport management, and did you ever, I guess, conceptualize a sport management degree to take you into esports?
So I grew up being around sports 24/7. Like ever since I was like 5, I was competing in like little like community running events and pee-wee football and all sorts of things like that. And kind of grew up in a very sports oriented family where I was told you're getting a sports scholarship, like you're going to be an athlete, like that's how you're going to go through college. Otherwise, you're going to have to really figure something out or get really good at something else. And so my sport was basketball and track and field growing up. And in high school, both my brothers went to Rice, both of them on track and field scholarships, and both of them were in sport management. And when I started hearing from them what their classes were, like some of the cool opportunities they were getting to work at, whether it was like volunteering at like a Texans game or something like that, I was like, wow, that sounds like really up my alley as someone who really loves sports. And originally I was like, I want to be a coach. I love just the process, the grind of competition. And so I was really wanting to be a coach initially. And I was kind of that way all the way up through like senior year of high school. And at this point, I knew I was going to Rice. I had gotten recruited there for track and field, and I knew right away like I'm doing sport management because they didn't have any sort of coaching or anything or any sort of education degree. And so I was like, okay, sport management is the closest, and then if anything, I can also just maybe turn coaching into something else down the road. And so that was like my initial thought going into sport management, and I never once wavered in like I never had like those junior year regrets where it was like, "Oh, it's too late, like I can't switch degrees or anything like that." But there was a point where like I started realizing I wanted to do other stuff. I started working a lot of events and started working with a lot of like doing like talent management and things of that nature. And so, like, my career path, I had imagined my freshman year changed very much by my junior year. And then it got to the point where I was doing all that talent management. I was like, maybe I want to be an agent. Maybe I want to do like sports law. And I was like, I have to be honest, I'm so indecisive on things like that. Like, I'm surprised I was able to stick to just sport management. I also have a minor in business, but like beyond that, within the sports industry, I was all over the place. Like I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was just like, okay, I'll try this experience. Oh, I don't like that one. Okay, I'll try this one. Oh man, that one was really fun. And then I'm over here, and then it's like, oh, I'm like getting to work with Olympic athletes. Oh, this is awesome. Like, I want to do this. And then, like, literally 5 months later, I do another event, and I'm like, wow, this would be a really fun job too. And so I was just all over the place. And I got, I had never really imagined working in esports. Like, as a kid growing up, I was like, that would be so cool. Like, I got into League of Legends at a fairly early age. I was like 12 or 13, I think, and started watching LCS in like season 2, if like the early parts of LCS, I guess that is. But like growing up, like it was just that. Like I grew up in a very rural area of Texas, and no one in my like within like 100 miles of me really knew what League of Legends was or really cared about esports, and just thought that gaming was like a waste of time because like everyone out here is like farmers and ranchers or working in the oil fields. And so like that's kind of like what's expected of you. You're not expected to just like sit at home and be lazy and all the other stereotypes that they were like kind of throwing my way. And so I just growing up, I was like, okay, I'm never going to be in esports. It's just as simple as that. And my junior year at Rice, the chair of our sport management department was approached by the dean of our School of Social Sciences. And the dean was just like, hey, I don't really know what esports is, but it looks pretty cool. And I see a lot of other schools doing it. You need to teach a class this coming fall or this coming spring. And my professor was just like, okay. And this is like August, and he has to have like a curriculum developed by January for something. And he's like someone who's been in the sports world all his life, but he's never taken a look at esports. And so he was just like, okay. And he started attending like all these different conferences and conventions all over in the fall. And then he actually met Sebastian Park, who, for any listeners that don't know, he was the vice president, I believe, of esports at Clutch Gaming Houston Rockets, which obviously is no longer a team, Clutch Gaming, that is. And so super fortunate that he met him and he talked with him, told him, because since obviously Houston Rockets is in same city as Rice, and Sebastian Park was like, you know what, I'm going to be in LA, but occasionally I'll be back in Houston, and when I'm not there, I can just Skype into the class. And so at that point, it basically became like Sebastian Park was our curriculum. So Sebastian Park, like our professor told him like, hey, these are the different areas of esports that I think we should cover. And Sebastian Park was like, perfect. I got a person for that. I got a person for data. I got a person for this. And so I think it was definitely like one of the most interesting experiences that a person who was like considering like at this point, I'm still like, okay, I see an esports class, I'm going to take it. This is awesome. But I'm still not convinced like this is what I'm going to do. Like I'm still convinced I'm going to be in the sports world. And then Sebastian Park goes and introduces us on a Skype call one time to McScragg, who was the head coach of Clutch Gaming at the time, introduced us to Vulcan, introduced us to Hooney. And as someone who had grown up in the scene, like watching Hooney all his life, I was just like, holy cow. Like I was like, I just took this class because I was excited, and all of a sudden now I'm meeting like a literal world champion and someone who's like been one of my favorite players of all time. And at that point I was just like, wow, like if I'm able to meet like a pro LoL player at this point, and I haven't even like really begun my journey on esports, then like where can I really be if I pursue this? And it just like kind of snowballed. So Sebastian Park introduced us to Hunter Lee, who's running the operations for Golden Guardians of Golden State Warriors, and started introducing us to tons of other different people. At one point, I met the former COO of Blizzard. And then like the funniest connection, honestly, was when we did our lesson on data and analytics within esports industry. Sebastian Park brought on Tim Sevenhusen, who is the head of data science at Esports One. And so I met Tim when I was still in college 2 years ago. And it was just like kind of a super funny thing. Like obviously like he forgot about me because I was just like that I was that college kid. And then like after like the first week of meetings, when I started getting to work on my podcast and I asked him to be my first guest, when we were like sitting there, like getting ready for the podcast, I was like, I met you 2 years ago. And he was like, what? And I was like, yeah, you spoke in one of my classes. I was like, you have no idea who I am, but like, I just randomly met you in one of my classes as a guest lecturer. And like, we just had a really good laugh about it. And it, like, to me, it was just like, wow, this is such a small world. But like that was one of the things that like really had me convinced on Esports One. Like during that lesson when we had Tim come on, Sebastian Park was praising Tim. He was like, this is one of the leading data and analytics guys within the scene. Like, you guys should get to know his work, all these different things that he's done. Because at that point, I think he was working on like Shadow GG and a few other things. And he was an analyst for Fnatic at one point and CLG, like several different teams. And so when I saw him at Esports One, like when I was like right before the interview process, I was just like, okay, if this guy who has been a part of all these amazing projects that he's created, if I see him here and like I hear all this praise from Sebastian Park last year when I was barely learning about esports, I really want to be a part of this company. Like I know if I'm surrounded by like people that are this successful already, then that can only bode well for my career. And so I was really excited and just like kind of blown away seeing something like that. I guess to just like wrap up as far as like on sport management from like that point, like obviously that was an amazing semester, an amazing class, and I was super sad to see that Rice canceled it after that one semester. But I was also super fortunate to have it. And at some point, I would really love to be able to actually teach that class at Rice, whether it's remotely or if I'm living in Houston doing esport, like still being a part of the esports scene there, but also still teaching at Rice. I would really love to see something like that. I really think more colleges and more sport management programs specifically should start looking at esports. But the professor who was like kind of my mentor, Tom Stallings, who's like done so much for me in so many ways. There was just one day where I was I was originally going to work for Adidas. They were doing an internship for them, and I was also looking at Nike. And I was just kind of getting thrown around by recruiters, like them beating around the bush saying, hey, like we're having to delay recruiting for another 2 weeks. Hey, we're not doing interviews for another 2 weeks. And it got to the point, like for anyone who's, especially within the sports industry, like you need experience. You need to be doing internships when you can. And it was like April, I think it was the very end of April, and I still didn't have a summer internship. And at that point, I hadn't done a summer long internship, which is super important for your resume. And I was sweating. Like I was so nervous. Like I was going through so much stress at that time. And I was in a really bad place, honestly, just with a lot of things going on.
Was this junior year?
Yeah, this was junior year. And from what I've seen, like just kind of and like talking with a lot of, we had access to a lot of like NBA, NFL teams and upper offices, and a lot of them were like, okay, doing tons of little events, that's awesome. We love seeing that experience, but we really need to see students and summer long internships at some point. Well, since it was already junior year, like I'm not going to be able to do one after my senior year. And so I was sweating. I was like, man, I'm just none of these jobs are contacting me back. And then I find out that I made it to the final round of interviews for this like super prestigious Nike internship. And then I lose. I don't get the spot, and it goes to like one of my friends actually. And I was just like, oh man. And then I find out like 2 weeks later I didn't get the Adidas one. And I'm just like, I'm absolutely down at this point. I'm just like, like I'll just have to find like a super basic sports job. I don't care what it is. I just need to find something. And I was looking for like literally anything at that point, like even if it was just miserable, like minimum wage sort of stuff, or even just free. Like I say minimum wage. I've worked so many like unpaid internships, like minimum wage is still really good within the sports world. But
Right. Yeah, I'm sure most sports professionals, at least in college, would take
yeah,
a minimum wage internship.
I definitely retract that statement. Like I was just looking for something at this point. And then my professor, like he sat me down in his office and he's like, okay, dude, like we have to figure out something. Like, what are you interested in? And I just kind of like started like throwing out all these different things within traditional sports. And then he was like, hey, you were a part of Professor Happenstall's esports class, weren't you? And I was like, yeah, it was amazing. I loved it. And I like at that point I just opened up like, yeah, I've been following League of Legends for like this many years. I've been like playing video games all my life. Start telling him all this stuff, and he's like, dude, why the hell are you trying to work in sports? Like, why aren't you pursuing esports? And I was like, because I can. Like, how am I? Like, I don't really have any connections that I can follow through with. Like, the only one I had, like, kind of teetered out and died. Oh, yeah, because also at that point, I forgot to mention this. Sebastian Park was in the process of interviewing me for an internship at Clutch Gaming. And at that point, and like, this was also happening like during the Nike stuff. And I was over the moon. I was like, this would be amazing. Like, who cares if Nike doesn't work out? I get to work with a pro LCS team. And then Clutch Gaming sells to Dignitas. And then Sebastian is like, hey, I honestly don't know what my job is going to be. Because this is like May and the sales like going through. And so like spring split is over. They're looking to summer split. He's like, I have to be honest, like, I don't really feel comfortable bringing you on when I don't know if I'm still going to be around in like 2 months. Like, that would feel really crappy for you. And I was like, no, I totally understand. So that was another thing that was like kind of added on. And then my professor was like, hey, I know these guys over at this company called mainline.gg, and they do a lot within the collegiate scene. And at that time, they're also partnered with ESPN, and we're putting on the Collegiate Esports Championships, which was covering like Overwatch, Street Fighter, Hearthstone, like tons of different titles. And he was like, let's get you an interview there. Let's see what happens. I went into an interview, met the team, and just kind of like told them what I was looking for. And at this point, like I was desperate for anything, but like to another level when it was for esports, because I was like, man, like if this is my opportunity, this would be amazing. And so they ended up giving me an operations position. And I say just operations because I literally covered like anything and everything in the book. So I ended up, while I was there, originally, like I was working a lot on like logistics and also just like event planning, and then helping out with a few small things around the office. But then they started running other tournaments and trying to like work with different esports titles. And then they started letting me learn a lot of production and broadcasting equipment. And so I started learning like I started doing free cam observing for FPS games. I started learning how to run the replay machine for broadcast, tons of different things like that. So I was getting tons of like small experiences with a lot of different things. But the ESPN one was super fun. So I was in charge of their like player practice area, and was meeting all these, like I met Clerky from I believe Maryville at the time, and a lot of the Maryville team, and I forget the names of some of the other really successful collegiate teams.
Was this for League or for
So
what?
it was for, I think, mostly just Blizzard games. So Hearthstone, Overwatch, Heroes of the Storm, a bunch of those, which I had never really had that much experience. Like, yeah, I had played them, but I had never really watched them competitively. But it was still a super cool experience to meet all these teams. And like my coworkers were just like, oh, that's so and so. Oh, that's so and so. Like, they're super big in the collegiate scene, and started meeting tons of different people like that. And I was like, oh wow. Like, that summer was my first real experience with esports, and I just dove in. Like I said, like my position covered a little bit of everything, but even beyond that, I tried as often as I could to sit in on kind of like same thing as now with Esports One. I tried my best to sit on all marketing meetings, all content meetings. I was trying to just like learn as much and absorb as much information as I could. And it was literally just like my life from like 8 a.m. until like 6:30 when my boss would kick me out. He's like, hey, I'm going home. You need to go home. And then I would just go home and just like watch tournaments, try and like get a better grasp on a lot of the different titles that I was potentially going to like cover in any sort of way. I was looking to return to mainline, but a lot of things, especially with COVID, a lot of different plans fell out. And then I was also looking at some other jobs back in traditional sports. Yeah, COVID screwed up a lot of my plans. Like right now, I would actually have been traveling around the country running events for this tennis company. and like living the life, like working like 4 days a week, but getting to travel to New York, to like Long Beach, to Miami, like all these different places around the country, and like get to enjoy like for a few days out of the week too. And then COVID happened, and then so that job fell through. But I got extremely lucky with Esports One, and I definitely like I'm very fortunate, I think, within the scene. Not everyone can just message a company and get an immediate response and also get an opportunity. But I also think that a lot of my other sports experiences that I've had along the way really prepared me for this. And especially with sport management, like I do agree with you on that, like how you said that you went through sport management because it was the closest thing and like most relevant thing. And just like obviously in terms of like traditional sports like business and everything, I learned a lot. But then also with my business minor, I think that gave me a pretty big edge on a lot of people. And I also like made sure to take as many other like electives while I was at Rice. But I tried like everything. I'm one of those where it's like jack of all trades, master of none. I try to learn as much as possible. And now I'm starting to get to the point where I'm realizing, okay, now that I'm in esports, I don't need to be a master at everything. Like I'm definitely never going to be a master. Like I I am terrible at coding. Like I could never do any of that. Obviously, like I'm a terrible League of Legends player, so I'd never be a pro player or anything or an analyst, but I'm trying to like kind of identify several roles within the industry, whether it's talent management, community manager, somewhere within like the marketing department or just business. I'm really trying to like narrow down my career path so I get a better understanding of what I'm looking at and I can start focusing on skills for that specifically.
I guess I have kind of one last question for you. Do you kind of have like any advice for anyone looking to get into community management? I know you kind of got in to community management in a very unique way, but do you have any advice that you could give?
I think that there's a lot of overlap with social media, even though I don't manage the socials at E1, because that would also be a lot because our socials team does a lot of great work and I couldn't imagine also tackling that. But I think there's a lot of overlap because socials is kind of the same thing. You're constantly engaging the users, trying to get new users, and also you care a lot about retention. I would say like mainly trying to, especially now with so many communities switching to Discord and building their community on Discord, get as familiar as possible. So something that I think has helped me a lot is just offering to, like, if I see a group of friends that end up just using like for me, the simplest thing, I had a lot of friends at one point that were like 20 friends that were playing League of Legends, and we were just like constantly using group chats and like text messages and stuff. I was like, we need servers, like we need a Discord server. So I built a Discord server that's just like me and a lot of friends and their close friends, and it's like slowly grown to like 200 people. I've put a lot of effort into that, and I test a lot of things. So before I do things in E1, I usually test it out in my own server, whether it's different types of bots or just like the format of your channels and like permissions and all that sort of thing. Especially if you're going to be in charge of a team or organization's Discord, I highly recommend trying to build as many Discord servers, whether you're just offering to streamers for free. Like if you notice that a streamer has like 3 channels and then like a voice channel, like offer like, hey, I really want to help you build this out, like I'll do it for free. And it kind of goes back to that same thing that I don't know how much Sam touched on it in your podcast, but I know like from his content, like be willing to do some of the free work, because like it's not hard to build a Discord server, but there's a lot of different possibilities to consider within it. And so try to build as many as you can, get very comfortable with it, get comfortable with Discord bots. I mean, also like if you're like super introverted and you're not really interested in talking with people, I don't know if community management is necessarily for you, but I do recommend like trying to break out of that shell, be willing to like engage with everyone, send memes, start getting really creative with a lot of the things you're doing, and always just be like willing to try like anything. So I have a lot of users send me ideas, and a lot of them have been like awesome. There's been several ideas that I've already like instituted within our Discord. So always be open to feedback and also be open to critique. Like the community that you build really depends on like how you handle your feedback, I think. So whether you actually take it and run with it, or you just kind of shut down and tell people, oh no, I don't really want to do that. So just be open and like honest and willing to hear it from all matters. Like especially at like E1, a lot of the different departments have like spoken to me about things that they would kind of be interested in seeing in Discord, asking why it might work or why it wouldn't. And so we've done changes like to help our dev team report bugs easier, just small stuff like that. So be willing to just like talk with people and get a feel of like, and recognize that each community is going to be unique and different. And you just have to kind of slowly work on it and slowly grow it and figure out what little changes are best for you. Yeah. And one last thing that I would say, I don't know how many people like, do you know who Dr. K is on Twitch?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So he had an amazing video last week where he was interviewing Destiny, XQC, Sweet Anita, Lily Pichu, and Devin Nash, the former owner of CLG. And they had amazing advice on community management, like building a culture that you want that's like positive vibes, trying to stay away from toxicity, and like recognizing like when you should ban people, when people are like reachable and able to like be changed into that super active engaged user, and like how to kind of like, there is so much. It was like a 2.5-hour show, 3-hour show, but I watched all of it, took tons of notes. And honestly, like even me who's been working in the month for 2 positions, I learned tons in those 2.5 hours. So I highly recommend for people to go and search that up if you are interested in community management or in streaming. So I think there's a lot of overlap there.
I'll have to check that out too, because I didn't see that. But yeah, Jesse, thank you so much for coming on. Do you want to like shout out your? You have the podcast and stuff, but do you want to shout out the podcast and kind of where can people find you? If is it okay if like people want to reach out and ask you any questions or anything?
Yeah, that's awesome. Like I'm always, obviously, like you can tell like just from like how much I've been talking. I know there's a few times where I kind of went off on rants or rambled a little bit, but I'm just getting started in esports and I love to talk about it as much as possible. I'm always willing to hear like any thoughts that people might have as far as how I can improve, or if they hear something on this that they think that I might be able to help them with, I'd be more than happy to. So the podcast you can find by searching E1 Fantasy The Lock-In on Google, or by going to Spotify or Buzzsprout. And then as far as reaching me personally, you can follow me on Twitter at Laredo_potato. So I'm always willing to talk and always willing to help you build a Discord server and get better at that, or you can kind of join mine and see how I do things.
My conversation with Jesse was really fun, and it was great to hear some insight from a fellow sport management graduate. Jesse's a great guy, and if you're interested in Fantasy League of Legends, make sure you check out Esports One and Jesse's podcast, The Lock-In. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Esports Careers Podcast, help us spread the word by rating and reviewing the podcast. That way, I can keep making great episodes for you to listen to, and it helps other people find us too. If you've got a question for me or someone you'd like me to interview, you can reach me on Twitter at DweebGG. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.